some of the leadership within the LGBT community has forgotten the roots of Pride, have forgotten that Pride began with the riot. It was about police literally shaking down gay men at bars all over the city. And then during the HIV/AIDS crisis, policing, gay men's sexuality. The leadership of the Pride March has basically turned the march over to the police, allowed the NYPD to determine every aspect of the march. It's the most wrong-headed, just anti-Pride way of thinking. My name is J.W. Walker. I am an organizer for Rise and Resist, Gays Against Guns, but I'm here today to talk about the Reclaim Pride Coalition. Pride to me means LGBTQ people standing up for our rights, our dignity, our ability to live our lives as openly and as completely as possible. When I first started going to the Pride celebration in the late 80s, early 90s, you could just join into the march from wherever you were standing on the sidelines watching it. It was a real feeling of community then. Everyone that was observing it, everyone that was marching in it, we were all one. Over the course of the last 20 years or so, starting during the Giuliani administration, the march started to be more and more closed off, more and more policed, more and more barricaded. A lot of people think that this has something to do with 9/11 and terrorism, but the truth is the over-policing of the Pride March really started in the mid to late 90s. First, it started with barricading off the West Village ridiculously, so that if you wanted to go from one end of a block to the other, you'd have to travel 3 or 4 blocks out of your way just to get to the other end of the street. And then shortly thereafter, the march route itself started being more barricaded off, more policed, to the point that now the marchers and the spectators are just completely separate. Many members of our wider queer communities are fearful of police, and with good reason. When you look at the activist community of gays, you've got people that were in ACT UP, in the 80s and early 90s, who were literally brutalized by police officers on the regular. You've got people who participated in the protests against hate crimes around Matthew Shepard's death, who had, policemen on horseback charged them. And so this sort of pinkwashing that the NYPD has been trying to do for the last, really in earnest, for the last 10 or 15 years, to the festooning cop cars and corrections vehicles with rainbows to somehow imply that, oh, we're all in this together. Well, I'm sorry, we're not. We've seen a ratcheting up of the policing of young black queer, male and female identified people in the West Village. We see in Spanish Harlem, for instance, where there's a growing population of trans Latinx women are being harassed regularly by police officers because they are assumed to be prostitutes solely because they are trans. These attacks on queers of color and trans folks of color have been going on steadily. Meanwhile, there's been no word from Goal about any of that. Goal exists essentially to make things better for police officers who are LGBTQ identified. Goal, however, has never done anything to vocally try to protect members of the public from police. So it causes a lot of friction, it causes a lot of problems, especially when we're dealing with the leadership of Heritage of Pride, who runs the Pride March and the various events around town. Heritage of Pride were the folks that have pursued the corporate community. They have pursued strong relationships with city government. Pride has become an opportunity to go after a market. What happens, though, is that the more marginalized members of our communities get forgotten, get left by the wayside. In the beginning, there would be a few politicians who were supportive of LGBTQ rights, and they were often outsiders. Over the course of the last 25 years or so, what we've seen is it being more respectable to be supportive of LGBTQ people, and the way that has affected the different marching contingents, especially the politicians and the corporations, is that they kind of take over, they kind of take ownership of the march itself. And so we've gotten to a situation where corporations were just taking up more and more space at the march, to the point that it really did become more of a parade. You know, it was one thing when there were a few bars or nightclubs or radio stations with floats with go-go boys dancing around, but when it becomes a bunch of banks, and then in addition banks who have really, really sketchy reputations outside of their supposed LGBTQ support, then it becomes really problematic. Then we found out that Heritage of Pride had apparently put together 6 possible new routes for the march and submitted them to the NYPD and allowed the NYPD to determine what the final route was going to be. Literally just sort of stripping Pride away from the West Village. The West Village being, you know, the home of the LGBTQ rights movement in New York City. These people that are supposed to be embodying Pride and being the beacons of Pride for the city and carrying that mantle of Stonewall have managed to get completely removed from the roots of this march. That's when we decided we're going to have to get together a list of demands, and we're going to have to publicly deliver them, and we're going to have to shame them in front of the mayor's office, in front of the public. We're going to have to issue demands to the NYPD, and that's what we did. We're just getting the word out because the whole goal is to have as many members of our community engaging with Heritage of Pride in the weeks and months after this year's Pride. Because next year World Pride is going to be held in New York City to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And we have it as our mission to ensure that Heritage of Pride honors the legacy of Stonewall appropriately and creates an environment where all of these, you know, millions of other people from around the world, many of whom are probably going to be coming from nations that don't have anywhere near the level of acceptance for their LGBTQ people. They're all going to be coming here, and we need to return New York to being that beacon for LGBTQ rights that it's rightly been seen as.